Hello and welcome to class. Welcome to yet another exciting episode of machine learning. Yay! Today we're going to talk about, to recap, in our last episode, we covered whatever we talked about. I don't remember because my mind wasn't working last time. Let's start with a couple quick questions. One that was brought up is, can my convolutional function handle arbitrary sizes? And the answer is yes, as long as arbitrary is defined to mean very specific. So let's suppose this is an arbitrary input image. Let's go with that one. And this is an arbitrary filter size. I'm going to assume that the output of your image is at least that size. So somewhere between that big and that big. And we'll shade the green in here like that. Here's what I mean. Yeah, as long as your output image is pretty close to the size of your input image plus or minus the width/height of your filter, and the filter has an odd width and height and depth and however many dimensions you have, then I know in those cases my convolve function works as one would expect. Whereas if you just pick random numbers for the input and the output sizes and the the filter sizes, I'm not certain that I wrote it right because I only thought about so many cases while I was coding it up. Yes?
So the filter has odd dimensions, and the input and outputs have odd or even?
I believe it works with even too. I just haven't thoroughly tested it. Input sizes don't matter. They can be odd or even. Output sizes don't matter. They can be odd or even. Filter sizes, it's very common to make them be odd because it has this nice property of making everything line up. If they're even, then there's an ambiguous case of where exactly did you place the filter in order to get this particular pixel of the output. Does that make sense? So I like those. I like using odd size filters just because then there's no ambiguity that needs to be defined.
And it can be, the output can be two less, right?
Two less.
It says plus or minus one, plus or minus the,
I mean, plus or minus the width of your filter. Now, as we mentioned, if the filter is exactly the same size as the image, then convolution is exactly the same as a fully connected layer that's mapping to the number of outputs equal to the number of filters that you have. So if your filter is that same size, then your output is pretty much expected to be 1 per filter. By contrast, if your filter is very tiny, then your output should be within a tiny amount error of your input size. So that. Did I answer the question? Okay. Now, this, to be clear, is not necessarily a fundamental rule of convolution. That's just my code, how I coded it up. In theory, I guess you could have all kinds of arbitrary sizes, but then you get most of the values being kind of undetermined. For example, if this is your input image, and you add to it crazy amount of padding, such that you're padding like this, then in your output, basically most of the values around the edges are going to be all zeros, right? Because you're basically convolving a bunch of padded zeros with your filter, and that's worthless. So really, these are the only cases that make sense. Your output image should always be within the width of your filter away from the size of your input image. And so therefore, those are the only cases I coded against and didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what if you try to do convolution in this really obscure case that nobody would ever want to do. Okay, I think I've answered the convolution question. The next question, yes?
In our case, we use a 2D
somewhat, the n1 use 3D convolution function in the image classification problem?
I used 2, 3, and 4 in my particular implementation of it. So yes, I think is the answer. Let me see if, let me point at this and see if we're talking about the same thing. So where was it? Somewhere I provided topology. There we go. This is the topology I used to classify the MNIST data set. I achieved 34 errors, which I claim is pretty good. Now, I take as input these 28 by 28 pixel images. That was defined by the data set. The data set has images of that size. I'm outputting just 10 layers. Notice I used a linear layer here. I could have just as well used a convolutional layer with a filter equal to whatever size preceded it, but that's what I did. And okay, I convolved this 2D filter with 32 2D filters, which produced a 3D tensor. I convolved that 3D tensor with 64 3D tensors, which produces a 4-dimensional tensor. And then, now that I've got this 4-dimensional tensor, what does that mean? What is that I mean, we started with 2D images, right? Now we're in 4-dimensional space. What are the dimensions of that space, if you think about it? Yeah, well, the first one of the dimensions is 32 replicated versions of the first problem. So for each image, it's got a width and a height, but we made 32 copies because there are different things to recognize in the images, right? Like you might want to recognize, okay, for example, here's a 6, here's a 0, here's a 9. They all have, that is a terrible 0. There's a 0. I still can't make a good 0. There's a 9. There's an 8. You see anything in common? They all have a O shaped on them, right? Whereas a 1 and a 7 and a 2 and a 5 all lack an O shape. Therefore, if you were trying to determine what handwritten digit has been expressed in this picture, one of the things you might do in your head is look for O shapes. And so one of those convolutional filters, you might say, is an O recognizer. And so one of the problems that first layer might be solving, one of these 32 5x5 filters might be a recognizer of curvy O-shaped things, and that would be useful information to feed into the next layer is I did or did not recognize a curvy O thing. But that question alone is not enough to determine what number you've got, right? You might also have an edge recognizer. So maybe one of the other filters recognizes straight edges. And the 1 and the 7 and the 6 and the 9 have straight edges, but the 0 and the 2 and the 5 don't have any vertical, oh, I guess they kind of do. Well, the 8 doesn't have a vertical straight edge. And so the purpose of having 32 filters is we're kind of saying, hey, we can recognize up to 32 different things in those 28 by 28 pixel images, and that's what information is getting fed in tensor form into the next level. But it's not just recognizing in the image, it's also saying where in the image the recognizer is. So at this location, there's not an O shape, but at this one, there's more of an O shape. And at this one location, there's lots of an O shape. And so we actually have an image of recognizableness in this tensor, and there's 32 in that extra dimension to indicate 32 possible things we could recognize. It might need more than 32, but I did 32 arbitrarily. Yeah.
Think it would have been better to choose 3x3 instead of 5x5?
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. So recently, and by recently I mean within the last year or so, I read something somewhere, and I can't even remember where, so I'm sorry, it's just hearsay, but somebody said that the direction the field seems to be moving is all the convolutional filters are going to 3x3s, and they just stack them super deep. The argument was many layers of 3x3 convolutions are better than just a few layers of big filters. And exactly why that is, I'm not sure, but I think the idea is that using multiple layers allows multiple thought processes to go together. And I guess it's constructing hierarchically bigger recognizers with each layer, and presumably that helps it learn somehow.
You think you should have done, if you did 3 by 3, should you have taken it from 32 to 48?
Probably, yeah. I'm guessing the answer to that is yes. A lot of the intuition for it I lack as well, and so I can't give it to you. The ultimate intuition is this: cross-validation will answer your question. Try it with 32, try it with 48. If 48's better, and you measured how long it was, and you think it was worth the difference, then yes, it's worth it. So all problems can be solved, all meta-level questions can be answered by cross-validation, but it's obviously better if you have intuition, because these networks are darn big and they take a darn long time to train, and it's a pain to try everything. So intuition certainly has its value. And here I kind of described, hey, we have 32 recognizers. What happens when we're recognizing within those recognized images 64 things of 3D tensors? Then what's it doing? And at this point, you know, I don't know what's going on. I just know that the principles of learning are built into this thing, and at some point it just becomes a nightmarish mess. And finally, at the end here, the whole reason we have a fully connected layer is nobody at all knows what it means. But if we just reduce it to 10 values, we can tell it what to mean, and it'll learn to mean that, if that makes sense. Yes?
I've noticed through looking stuff up online that a lot of people will cap off their list of layers with a softmax. Is there a reason we didn't do something like that?
Yes. There is a reason to. So I haven't actually kind of taught softmax, and it's there's no reason I haven't. It's just slight. It requires one more principle than I've covered yet. So kind of just because we've already learned tanh and it works just as well. Second reason is I don't really like softmax very much, because I've been fiddling with tanh and I always get better results with tanh. Now that's probably because of the problems I happen to be testing on, because a huge community of people is using softmax. And so I'm definitely in the wrong here, but I just like tanh. It seems to work well. The primary usage for softmax is when working with probabilities. And so I tend to find that the statistical people drive a lot of things based on theory, and they lack the corresponding practical side to it. And so my initial impression was, hey, we've been driven to softmax by people who don't ever actually try it and see how it performs. And there's some truth to that. Softmax is a good thing to do. It has beautiful probabilistic properties with Kullback-Leibler divergence being minimized when you optimize a softmax layer. But in practice, when I take a softmax layer and just replace it with tanh, I often get better results anyway. So that's my argument against them. There's some more to say with them, though, so I need to cover that, add that to my queue.
Is there a reason you didn't use tanh for the last layer on this one?
Oh, I didn't? Yes, because I had already used leaky rectifier and I just copied and pasted, I think is my reason. I don't know, but I bet you if you use tanh there, it'll work slightly better. But I'm not certain of that. The nice thing about tanh is it's really good for squashing values within a range, and we wanted the output range to be squashed between 0 and 1 because those are our targets, yeah. Rectifiers are good at reaching off to any values you want.
Right, that's why I thought it was weird to...
It is a little weird.
Like an error was like 6,000 minus 0 or, that kind of
Yeah, and that's kind of bad. Squashing it will make it more stable. Now, there is an argument lately that rectifiers are better than sigmoids, and the argument is that sigmoids seem to be, they squash on both ends, and rectifiers only squash one end. And if you think about Occam's razor, you want to do as little as you can, right? So rectifiers only have one bendy place in the activation function. tanh have two bendy places in the activation function. And so one is less than 2, therefore Occam's razor says go with rectifiers. And yeah, I think that's that. Yes?
Let's So for like a lot of neural net stuff, it seems like there's a lot of theories for why things should work, and then people test them and they don't really work out that way. And it seems
Yes.
to happen more in neural net than other machine learning tools. Is that like, is there a reason for that? Or?
It does indeed. So I guess let me contrast two learning models. This is actually a machine learning class, and I'm really just hammering on neural nets. I think you've noticed that. And the reason I'm doing that is largely because neural nets are the best and everything else is lame, and I like neural nets and stuff like that. But I think that there is some fairness that needs to be given. So let's look at neural nets versus, and I'll pick a random forest. Random forest. I covered random forest in my AI class, so some of you are familiar with them. Here's the basic gist of it. Random forest is built based on decision trees, and decision trees are really, really fast for learning. They're rather volatile. If you build an ensemble of trees, we call it a forest. That is a whole bunch of trees all voting together. We make a forest. Here are some properties. Neural nets are hard. Random forest is easy. By which I mean neural nets have zillions of meta parameters because you've got to tune the width of your neural net, the height of your neural network, the number of layers, the number of units in every layer, your learning rate, your momentum term, a lot of crap, right? What do you have to do to use random forest? You have to pick the number of trees. And if you get hardcore into random forest, you might pick the threshold at which you stop growing your trees. You make them stumps rather than fully filled out trees. You might also pick the number of attributes that you evaluate in order to select randomly among them, although people have pretty much figured out the answer is 1, and that always works best. So random forest, there's pretty much no parameters. And therefore, you run it, you get results, you're done. To draw an analogy, random forest is like a gun. You pick it up, you point, you pull the trigger, bang, the guy at the other end is dead. Neural nets are kind of like an improvised explosion device. While on the one hand, they're very capable of doing vast amounts of damage and flinging shrapnel in all directions and things like that, there's 1,001 possible ways to get your detonator to not work properly, to have a wire misplaced. There's timing issues. You better know a bit about chemistry. It's not easy to take an improvised explosive device and go cause mass destruction without putting a lot of meditated thought into it. This is not a lecture on how to be a terrorist. That was a bad example. I don't know why that came out of there. Deep in my heart, maybe I'm a terrorist. I'm not, by the way. But